everybody. How you doing? This is Clinton Bonner from
Because those
TopCoder.
solar panels are so large, because of where our
academics as well, consulting firms, vendors who want to understand in a sort of neutral way.
Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to another version of TopCoder Interviews. I'm Clinton Bonner, and today we're going to be joined by a triple threat out there. He's an author, he's a speaker, he's a blogger, and he's just unleashing a new book coming out in early March. His name is Phil Simon. He's coming up right now on TopCoder Interviews. Phil is an author. I think you would be safe to say your most famous work was The Age of the Platform, your last book, and coming right around the bend, I think in very early March, Phil's got a brand new book coming out called Too Big to Ignore: The Business Case for Big Data. So as you know, on TopCoder, we're always talking about data visualization. We're always talking about the topics surrounding big data, quantified self topics, sensor technologies, all the things that are now feeding and creating these neo bits of big data. And so we went out there and nabbed this fine gentleman, who, by the way, you can follow it at Phil Simon right here, to talk about this book and talk about the relevance and really talk about why it's important for right now to really hone in on the value behind big data, not just understanding, but kind of bridging the gap over to now. Okay, 2012 was all about understanding this terminology that was coming into the lexicon, and now 2013 is here. It's already late January, so now it's time to start to kind of turn the page and talk about value creation in big data. So I think Phil could really help us put a fine point on some of those things. So Phil, let's just dive right into the topic du jour here. So you got this great new book coming out. I'm sure you're excited about it. I believe it's being published by Wiley. Is that correct?
Yes.
Great. So all right, big, obtuse first question for you. Who needs to read this book and why? What are they gonna get out of it?
Well, hopefully, Clinton, it will convince people that it isn't just a bunch of noise. There's actually a signal in this external data, this unstructured data of tweets and Facebook likes and Yelp reviews and call detail records and all these other things. Historically, people have thought of data. They thought of the internal structured data that was in a database or an Excel spreadsheet. But increasingly, Clinton, as you know, that's becoming less and less the data landscape. We're seeing more and more stuff out there, and it's growing exponentially. So to answer your question, I think that anybody in business or a corporate setting, a nonprofit, government, if you want to understand where we're going or where we already are, I'd like to think that the book is going to be one of the first one out on the topic. So hopefully that's the sweet spot. But academics as well, consulting firms, vendors who want to understand in a sort of neutral way the massive trends that I identify in the book. Hopefully that's the audience.
Very cool, very cool. So, I've interviewed some authors in the past, or at least talked with them, and when they're researching books like this, where it's kind of a newer topic, they always seem to come across a story or two that really even takes them by surprise, that they weren't even thinking about or considering as a case study, but then it kind of comes into the limelight as they're doing more and more research. Without giving the book away, can you shed a little light on maybe an example or two of some of the things that kind of just unearthed themselves as you did your research and as you really delved into this topic
Sure.
of big data?
Sure. One of the myths I found, Clinton, is that big data is really not just for big companies. If you go back 15 years to when I first started working at enterprise IT, if you needed an Oracle database, if you wanted to buy a CRM or an ERP application, you were talking about many millions of dollars in a license fee and consulting and support. It was a very big effort that really informed my first book, Why New Systems Failed. Now with the cloud and software as a service as a business model, you can be a very small company. And I profile a couple in the book. And by small, I mean under 100 or 200 people. You certainly can be a big company or big organization like NASA and still outsource part of your open innovation or your big data efforts through a site like TopCoder, but you certainly don't have to be a big company to use big data. And second, I thought that big data may sort of supplant individual gut instinct or reaction. There still is, I think, a great deal of value in trusting your gut, but also looking at the data. I think it was Ronald Reagan who said, trust once but verify, or something along those lines. So you're not going to necessarily use big data to create the next great product. I mean, Steve Jobs was notorious, as you know, for not trusting focus groups, right? I think his famous quote was something along the lines of, if you ask customers what they want for a car, they'll tell you they want the same model.
Yep.
So if you
Yeah.
want to
Yeah.
completely innovate and think differently, then big data may not be the solution. But I think that big data can certainly augment our understanding. Certainly, tools like A/B testing that I cover can be used uh, by any individual person, even authors, for their titles. So there are so many ways to use big data, but by no means do I think that it supplants the need for people to have interesting ideas and to trust their judgment. But they can confirm maybe some of the things that they previously 5 years ago could not confirm.
Got it. Got it. So one quick kind of rabbit hole to go down there. You mentioned some of the smaller companies and smaller, 100 to 200 person units utilizing big data to gain some sort of advantage. I think there's a lot of people out there who think, the only players are the Walmarts of the world and the big financials because they have the data set first of all, and like at Amazon, then they have the capacity to use some of that data. Can you give just an example of like how some of the smaller companies and specifically are using these
Sure.
these new sets?
Sure, there's a company that I profile in the book called Explorers, which is a Cleveland-based healthcare company, and it is by no means a big company in terms of number of employees, but they can do big things. Most interestingly, I find they help their clients not only look at their internal data to figure out what's going on, but they marry it with external or social data. So, for instance, if let's just say they saw an uptick in admittals in the emergency room, maybe they can marry that with tweets or other external information, blog posts, or maybe people don't know that there's a doctor's office 2 blocks around the corner, and obviously going to a doctor, all else equal, is a lot less expensive than going to an emergency room.
Sure.
So maybe there's a lack of understanding. Maybe it manifests the need for greater community involvement or communication. So Explorers is by no means a big company. It has big clients, but their technology, well, a lot, particularly with open source tools like Hadoop, because they're open source, can let you do things that, again, 5, 10 years ago weren't even possible. And if they were, you're talking about orders of magnitude more expensive.
Got it. Very good. So, what, in your opinion, what's holding big data back, and is there that point of a point of no return where it's kind of saturated throughout many parts of society? Is there something holding big data back at this point to really get at the kind of nutshell of where the value is? And if there
Yeah.
is, what's kind of the transition bridge over to the masses really enjoying the value from all of this data being created?
But I'd argue that the masses already are enjoying the value because if you use Google, Google is a big data company. Ditto Apple and Amazon and Facebook and Twitter. Just because every company doesn't get it doesn't mean that you and I can't take advantage of big data. But to answer your other question about what's holding it back, I think there are a number of factors. One is there's a lack of big data expertise. Data science is a very popular field right now, but there are only so many of them. So a lot of organizations, even if they recognize the value, might not have the people to put these into place. Also, there's, I think, the concern among a lot of CIOs that this is just another fad or buzzword, right? No CIO in a downward economy wants to bet the future of his or her company on something that may wind up being a flash in the pan, although I'd argue it isn't. So those are just a couple of reasons. And like anything else, Clinton, as you know, technology typically follows an adoption life cycle. So at first, not everybody jumped on the internet. Not everyone jumped onto cell phones, right? It took a while for people to get to email. Well, now, of course, everybody, for the most part, uses those, at least in the United States. So some people are reluctant. But I think like anything else, and I talk about this in the book, once we see more, hopefully, books and talks and case studies out there of organizations that are actually seeing enormous value, and hopefully my book will help in that regard, then maybe they'll say, maybe we ought to experiment this, not necessarily throughout the organization, but maybe just in the marketing department. Right? You're able to, I think, do things at a small level, but then scale upward. To my knowledge, there's no real practical limit, for instance, on how much data you can keep in and do.
Got it. So I'll leave you with one last question. So a couple of years ago was the age of the platform. 2013, which we're in right now, it's the business case for big data. So looking 24 months ahead, 36 months ahead, looking into that crystal ball of yours, what's beyond big data? Do you have a guess? Do you have a guesstimation? Do you have an inkling? Do you want to throw a line out there? What happens after big data?
Well, we're already seeing the semantic web evolve before our eyes. And for those of the people who don't know, it's basically the internet in much more context or meaning. So Google had a product a couple years ago that it retired, but I write about it in the last book, The Age of the Platform. If you did a Google search, instead of just getting back text-based results, you would get back, in effect, a spreadsheet. so it would be very contextual. There would actually be more metadata around the search. So I wish I could predict the future, man. Instead, I'm the guy who bought Apple at 675 and watched it go to 450 today. But I just stay along for the ride. I definitely have some ideas. I did not think that I'd be writing a book about big data a year and a half ago, but it was obvious to me that it was not just a fad. So technology just happens so quickly these days, as you know, that I like pushing myself and learning. I like looking forward, and if I'm wrong about big data in 2 years, people think it was a fad, then I guess I was wrong, although I doubt it. To me, that's more interesting than writing a book today about social media, just because we've seen that movie before.
Absolutely, sure. And if I were, if I was a gambler man, and sometimes I am, I'd put my chips in for big data too. So that makes two of us. So, well, thank you very much, Phil. Do appreciate it. Again, this is Phil Simon. You can find him on Twitter at Phil Simon, real easy. His brand new book is Too Big to Ignore: The Business Case for Big Data. You can, of course, pick it up on Amazon. Or Phil, what's your site? Where can the folks go get it?
As of a month ago, it's philsimon.com.
Very simple, right? Keep it easy. All right, Phil. Thank you so much. We'll see you. We'll see you very soon.
Thanks, Clinton.